keep hearing this idea that politics is evil. And they're not saying that evil things can happen in politics. They're saying politics itself, government itself is evil. So you're entering into like the devil's playground. Do y'all have the same visceral reaction that I do?
Well, I mean, and this may not be the correct theological position here, but as a good Presbyterian, everything's evil.
Yeah.
So, why stop at politics?
Amy, Dan, Napp, thanks for being with us. What I'd love for us to do today is for you to help me figure out what's going on and understand, at least understand better than I currently do about like American politics, specifically around government. Most of what I know, my working knowledge about the American political system, I learned from watching The West Wing, which is an old TV show about the White House, stuff like that. So I need some help. And I know many of the pastors that are serving in churches across America, we're hearing things that are sometimes confusing, words like habeas corpus or due process. And so would just love for you to help educate me and maybe remind some of us who are listening what these things are, why they're important. But before we get into that bit, I'd love to hear from you. You are super smart and you've done a ton of thinking and reading and even teaching on religion and politics. So how did you get involved in like this idea of religion and politics, faith and politics? And what role do you play in the year of our Lord 2025? So Amy, would you go first?
So I'm Amy Black. I am starting my, this is scary, 25th year teaching American politics at Wheaton College. And I've been teaching American politics longer than that, but we'll just date myself with a quarter century. I think that's sufficient. So I teach American politics. I do a lot on institutions. I spent time as a congressional fellow, so I spent a year working in Congress as an academic to sort of see what it actually looks like on the ground. I got more interested in religion and politics actually when I came to Wheaton. I'd been at secular places before. I thought it was important, but I didn't really want to get pigeonholed as sort of, oh, that wacky evangelical who does religion and politics. Mm-hmm. But I came here and now I'm outed as a wacky evangelical because I did Wheaton. And it just seemed to me that a lot of what I read in the media, it just seemed like there were a lot of misunderstanding of religion and politics and not understand. And so part of what I've learned is that it's really fun to get to talk to reporters, particularly off the record, and just sort of explain, so what's the difference between a fundamentalist and an evangelical, and what's all these kinds of things. So it's something that I sort of grew into as I came to Wheaton. And one of the things I've really enjoyed being at a Christian college is that I have the opportunity to speak to both Christian audiences as well as academic audiences. So my book projects have kind of alternated between an academic book that very few people read that cost $100 and a book with a Christian publisher, a paperback that is good for a small group Bible study or adult education. So I kind of do a little bit of all of that.
That's cool. Dan, how about you?
Yeah, similarly, I got my start in political science as an Americanist, someone who studies the American political system. It's what I focused on in grad school. A little bit more focused on the legal system and the courts. Lately, it's shifted a bit more into public opinion and political behavior with regards to legal protections, such as those in the First Amendment, religious freedom, et cetera. But my first experience with Christian higher education came as an undergrad at George Fox University in Oregon. I hadn't attended any type of Christian school growing up, and those 4 years at George Fox were really formative in terms of shaping what kind of person I was and ultimately what kind of career I wanted to have. I'd known for a while that I wanted to be a teacher. I was thinking maybe social studies or civics in some capacity, but the more opportunities I had to read and write in the domain of political science kind of opened those doors that maybe graduate school and pursuing a PhD in political science would be a possibility. I had really encouraging advisors and an advising professor at George Fox. It encouraged me to do that. And in grad school, that's what I did. I started to focus a little bit more on my work on the intersection of religion and the law. I think I resonate a lot with Amy. The first book that I wrote was very much an academic text based on my dissertation, looking at the Christian legal movement in the United States. And since I've gotten to John Brown University here in Northwest Arkansas, it's my 10th year. And I've started to feel a pull more towards speaking to my brothers and sisters in the church, not as a way to serve as the expert, so to speak, but really as a person of encouragement to say, hey, it can seem complicated, our American political system. It can be divisive, but I think Christians have a pretty important and in many ways special role to play in this system. And so any opportunity I can get to talk about those things with fellow Christians is something I really like to do. And certainly I get to do that with my students every semester. And it's a real blessing to do the kind of work that I do.
That's cool. Napp, how about you?
Yeah, so in the 1990s, when I was a young evangelical, I was interested in how my faith influenced my politics, and that the Christian right was really big at the time. And so I became interested in those topics. Also, I read Mark Knowles' The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind, which got me more interested in academia. And so decided to get a master's degree, focused on religion and politics, then went to the University of Florida because that's where Ken Wald, who's one of the foremost experts on religion and politics, was a professor, and he was my dissertation advisor. Did a dissertation on the Christian right. Worked in academia. Then I worked as the politics editor for the Christian Post for 8.5 years. And now I'm executive director of AVC, American Values Coalition.
Nice. And my name is Caleb, and I went to seminary and didn't learn anything about American civics. So thank you so much for being with us today and for helping me figure this stuff out. So the thing I've been hearing lately is I think Latin is this word habeas corpus. And first off, that sounds like a heavy metal band from the 1980s. I don't think that's what we're referring to, though. So I'm hearing things from like on the news and from folks in my congregation, like, can you believe what's going on with like the suspension of habeas corpus or something like that? So what is habeas corpus, and like, why are people talking about it right now?
Well, people are talking about it because Stephen Miller, who works for the Trump administration, had floated the idea of suspending habeas corpus, which you're not, which is actually only Congress can do that, not the president. But I don't know. Why don't I throw it to Dan? He's more of the legal expert here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot more simple than it might sound. But basically, if you're detained by the state, and anytime you're arrested, you're being detained by the state, you have a legal right to essentially ask for evidence as to why you're being detained. So habeas corpus is a legal principle that supposedly safeguards against unlawful detention. So the government, basically the burden of proof for your detention would be on the government to show an impartial judge, here's why we're holding Caleb in jail. In absent habeas corpus, the government could theoretically detain people without another term that you'll want to talk about, probably due process, or reasonable causes. And that could lead to some pretty sticky situations. There are, as Napp suggested, some constitutional reasons why habeas corpus might be suspended at certain times, particularly during invasions or periods of rebellion. Famously, during the Civil War, habeas corpus was suspended for a time, and that was one of President Lincoln's maybe lesser known and approved decisions. But so it can be done, but it should be done very, very sparingly. And the fact that Stephen Miller has floated this and just floated it, right? This isn't an incoming policy that we know of. But even mentioning it raises people's alarm bells, and I think rightfully so.
And just to add to that, it's also sort of connected to that larger concept of unlawful detention. And so we haven't yet seen suspension of habeas corpus in sort of a Civil War Lincoln kind of way, but there have been people who have been detained by different government entities and are unclear about why they have been detained and have not had access to a lawyer and have not been told. So these are the kinds of things that we expect our judicial system to allow everyone. We call it due process of law, that everyone should be treated the same under the law, that they should understand any charges against them, that And the idea here is we treat everyone the same under the law. We have rules and we follow them so that we don't privilege one person, or we don't also decide to harm someone else. So everyone ideally should be treated equally. So we have had due process issues coming up with some of the with many of the detentions of foreign nationals on our soil. So that's been part of the conversation as well.
Mm-hmm. So thinking about habeas corpus, so I think like I've been on some mission trips to different parts of the world, and occasionally there's times where I'll be in a place where the coaching that we get from our host is like, hey, if you get picked up by the military, police force, whatever it is, do this, this, and that. Like you have no recourse. So
Right.
like, call this number, keep your mouth shut. And of course, stories of like people disappearing for one reason or the other, or being one instance I know of is like the government was looking for like the local police were looking for a bribe, and they literally just picked the person up and they were like, yeah, the fee is X amount of dollars. And then also political dissidents, speaking out against power, and then the power takes you. These are maybe risks or effects if we suspend habeas corpus, that those types of things could happen. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, anytime there is a lack of a check on the government in terms of who can be detained and for what purpose, we've seen, throughout history and even today in authoritarian regimes, people either being detained without proper legal reasoning or just indefinitely. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that we should remember about habeas corpus and this legal doctrine is that it serves as a major check on government power. Supposing our system works the way that it should, Article 3 specifies, judges are independent actors, and it's really, their opportunity to put the executive branch, the enforcers of the laws, in check when it comes to these detentions at the federal, but also state and local levels as well. So you would see this in certain places, Russia. I mean, in North Korea, if you're detained, it's not like you can say, well, you're violating my habeas corpus rights. That doesn't exist, right? In systems governed by the rule of law, though, we expect something higher from our systems.
Got it. And you said Article 3. What does that mean?
Well, it's an article of the Constitution. Article 1 gives powers to Congress. Article 2 gives powers to the president. And Article 3 gives very few defined powers to the courts and judges.
Okay, got it. Okay. So we've hit on, and Amy, you got into this a bit, this concept of due process. Can y'all tease that out a little bit more? Why is due process important for us? And also, like, what is it?
Go ahead, Dan. I gave part of it, so you can continue.
Well, essentially, language is found in the 5th and the 14th Amendments that states that people's life, liberty, or property cannot be infringed without due process of law. And what this effectively means is that in order for the government to either take something from you, to detain you, to imprison you, they have to follow a very specifically defined set of guidelines or a checklist. So oftentimes when someone is convicted of a crime and they're filing legal appeals, the question isn't necessarily about innocence or guilt, but it's basically like, did the government follow the rules that are required by existing laws or the Constitution? And so even for someone that's clearly guilty of an offense, for example, that person still is given a set of certain rights under the Constitution. We've seen this a lot in terms of not only detention of, say, people who are here in the United States without documentation, illegally, whatever you want to call it, and then sent overseas or shipped out of the country. The question isn't whether they were here illegally, right? There's no one's challenging that. The question becomes whether those requirements for the government to not only detain, but then send the person away to deport the person, whether that process was followed. Those are the major questions that we're encountering right now. And the biggest controversies of the Trump administration's second term so far has been essentially, are they denying due process rights to people who were eventually deported to some of these overseas prisons, for example? So that's due process in a nutshell. It's basically the rules the government has to follow. Amy and Napp, you guys can add to that, amend.
Yeah, and it's for everyone in our jurisdiction. It's not just, you don't have to be a citizen to have due process rights. And if you think about, you know, uh, the due process itself will decide whether or not you are here legally. So if you say that no one has if you say that non-citizens don't have due process rights, then that would eventually mean that none of us have due process rights, because the government could just say, you're not here legally, we have no due process, and they could ship you off to a foreign torture prison or whatever.
And to piggyback on that too, I think this is something that often comes up in these conversations. Constitutional rights are rights, as Napp said, for everyone living in the U.S. jurisdiction. So it's not, I'm a U.S. citizen, so I have certain constitutional rights, but my friend here is not a U.S. citizen, so he doesn't have, that's not how it works. When we talk about constitutional rights, they are rights that should apply to everyone residing in the U.S., everyone on U.S. soil. That little slight asterisk for diplomats, and their diplomats have a little special diplomatic immunity, but everybody else is both, and it goes both ways, so that our criminal laws apply to everyone if they are here, whatever status they're from. If you are a visitor, if you are here on a visa, if you have overstayed a visa, if you have crossed a border, the criminal laws all apply to you if you'd like them to or not. But in the same way, these civil protections and these constitutional rights, the right to remain silent, the right to a lawyer, all these kinds of things, these are all rights that we all should have constitutionally, because we are here within the jurisdiction of the United States.
And as someone who tends to describe himself as a small government conservative, when we talk about due process and habeas corpus and all the other rights that are established in the Bill of Rights or the amendments to the Constitution, these are, and I've said this already in these just first 10 minutes, fundamental checks on government power. They prevent or are supposed to prevent the government from exercising power it doesn't or shouldn't have. And due process is one of the most fundamental aspects of this. We're talking in some cases about being detained, imprisoned, or essentially shipped out of the country. It doesn't get any more high stakes than that.
So, Amy, if I'm understanding, and Napp, you hit on this too. You use the word jurisdiction. I've heard this term like the laws of the land.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm understanding you right, like if you just think about a map and the map of America, like if you're on the land, right, the laws, the rights are apply to you. And if we, Dan, if I'm understanding you correctly, if we suspend that or weaken that or, stop doing that, then everyone who's on the land is at risk. So it's not just like, hey, I want you to suspend due process for the people I don't like. And then, of course, government, you'll stop doing that and you'll never do it to me. I think what I'm hearing, Dan, you say is the concern is, well, if you do it to my neighbor, it's likely, or at least possible, you'll do it to me. Am I understanding that right? Like if we don't apply it to everybody who's on the land, the risk is that then the government can just do it to us, do it to me.
Yeah, I mean, really, really simply, I think if one person doesn't have constitutional rights that should have constitutional rights, then none of us have constitutional rights.
Got it.
And it's not just, I don't have, this could happen to me. I mean, it's fair to have that concern, but we're people who are about loving God and neighbor. And if one person doesn't have his or her rights, another might not either. And this is not how our system is designed, and they are not protected. So of course I'm concerned about my own constitutional rights, but what I see happening right now, which concerns me, is that there's a thread of conversation, and there are people who believe that constitutional rights only apply to U.S. citizens, and that these rights don't apply to anyone else on our soil. And that's just not how the Constitution works. So that's one of those pieces of disinformation that we'd like to inform.
Yeah.
So you can disagree about exactly what our constitutional rights are. We can watch the Supreme Court. Sometimes things go all the way to the Supreme Court to interpret what they mean. But the idea that these rights apply to everyone is inherent in the Constitution. And if you're on our soil, those rights apply to you. And I'm closest to the northern border, so if I were to go up and visit my friends in Canada, when I made my way through immigration, show my passport, I go into Canada, I then I have the rights and privileges of being on Canadian soil, and I be treated as anyone else on Canadian soil, even though I'm a U.S. citizen, and vice versa.
Yeah, I would even add it's inherent in the Declaration of Independence as well, because
Sure.
all of us are created equal.
So we've referred to some pretty important documents that I keep hearing about that I think are in Washington, D.C., that people a couple hundred years ago or something wrote down. I want to shift and think about
250 for that Declaration of Independence.
That's right.
Coming
That's
up next
right.
year.
Something like, I'm not good at math, Amy. So the Bible is older than that. And I'm hearing a lot of people maybe a little bit more in line with my vocation who are saying, sure, Constitution, sure, Declaration. We need to go back to the Bible, which says we need kings and magistrates, and we need to dominate and do kingdom of God, on earth as it is in heaven, which means we need to take over the government. Thoughts?
That's really bad biblical exegesis is my first thought.
Say more.
Right. Well, we'll start with, when we're given the Lord's Prayer, the kingdom is God's will here on earth as it is in heaven. The king here is there's only one king, and that's the Lord God. So, and we do have kings in the Old Testament, and actually that's what I've been reading in my devotions lately. And, it's a really good reminder. When my daughter was in second grade, they were studying the kings, and they had pictures of all of the kings, and then they either had a happy face or a sad face based on the good or bad king. There were lots of sad faces. Lots of sad faces. Right? So we see kings rise in the Old Testament not because God wants us to have a king. He wants to be our king, but kings arise because we are fallen and we ask for one, and God gives us one. So I can see some people say, well, that's right. God's our king, so let's let him rule right here. Here come be the ruler of the United States. I just don't understand that to be how the Bible works. I do think there is one king. He is on the throne. That is our God, and his powers are ultimate, and he rules over everything. But that final rule, the new heavens and the new earth, when we see the final kingdom of God manifest as God designed it. Right now, we're in that difficult liminal space between that now and the not yet. We know it's coming, but it's not here. So if we're in that space where the kingdom of God has not been fully realized, what does that mean for us as followers of Christ? I would say what that means for us is that we need to build and support the best institutions that we can to govern ourselves, recognizing that they're fallen, just like everything else. The fall affects everything, I would argue. So we have fallen, broken institutions that are led by, what do you know? Sinful, broken people, just like all four of us on this podcast and everybody listening. Right? So we have these imperfect institutions, but what we want to do is help create the strongest, best institutions we can that protect the people the best they can, that serve mercy and compassion and justice. That's what we're trying to do with government. It's not, I think everything here in the Bible should turn into a law that applies to everyone, Christian or not. That's where I'd start with. I'm sure Dan has some thoughts too.
I've really got no notes. That was very well said. Yeah, I think the exegesis part is important. The idea that our understanding of Scripture and its influence on our lives essentially stops in the first century AD, and we can't really live in a world that has changed or shifted or advanced beyond that particular historical moment is I would say wrong and certainly lacking in many respects. So yeah, I think not only just the weaknesses and the imperfections of the kings of Israel, which I'm not a biblical scholar, but goodness, that seems to be kind of the point of telling those stories, right? Samuel warned Israel early on, hey, you probably don't want a king. They're like, no, we're good. We're built different. We can do it. And historically, does not go well.
Lots of sad faces.
Lots of sad faces. I love that. So that we should then emulate that and to reference an Arrested Development joke, but it might work for us, right? I'm not convinced by that. I'm convinced that our system of liberal democratic constitutionalism is a pretty good system, despite its weaknesses and imperfections. Anything again, This comes back to my view as a small government person. Any attempt to get the power away from, government entities and put it, disperse it, separate it out, I think that's a good system. Doesn't mean it's a perfect system. But anytime we're trying to concentrate power in the hands of one or a few people makes me very, very nervous because of our nature as fallen and sinful people.
Yeah, and going to that Samuel reference you mentioned, Dan, there was also a lot of FOMO going on at the time because they said, we want a king like those other people, like those other nations, So
Right.
there was like some jealousy going on, like, oh, we want to be like them. That God was like, no, I'm your king. You're different. You should be different. So, and I'd also point out that Jesus had plenty of opportunities for political power. He could have taken that path, but he chose a different path.
And I love too, if we look even at Jesus' disciples. So not only does he not choose to be a political leader in that sense, he chooses among his inner circle, his 12, he chooses people on each side of the biggest political debate of the time, taxation in the Roman Empire. So the fact that if you can imagine having the most conservative Republican and the most conservative Democrat and putting them together, that's what you've got, sort of biblical times. So Jesus was saying, what I'm teaching here and what we are doing here is far above your political battles and far more important. And you can unify around these principles, even when you have big disagreements, like over the biggest political debate of our particular time.
So we've got congregations all across America who are hearing or seeing on screens some folks who are using God talk to say, take over the government. We have to rally ourselves together to take power and make sure Christians are in charge so that we can make America Christian again, or something like that. There's also other groups who say politics is dirty business. Don't touch it. Like, don't get involved in this the civic life of your community, the political life. It's a dirty business. I think many pastors I know are not satisfied with those two options. And we're being invited to encourage our congregants who are trying to figure out, how do I love my neighbor as myself in the body politic? Some of us, they're asking about voting or advocacy or even protests, or some thinking about running for, city hall or dog catcher, some, civic service, civil service. So as you think about, from your perspective, the role of the pastor in America today, recognizing there's these two extremes, how would you give us pastors some coaching on how we could invite the congregations that we serve to engage in a healthy way in the American democracy, advocating according to our convictions, but not drifting into domination territory?
So I think the language that has been really helpful for me is from a guy named Michael Ware, who wrote a book called The Spirit of Our Politics, draws a lot on Dallas Willard and his thinking and its influence on politics. But Michael's approach to politics is one that it is a venue in which we as Christians can love our neighbors. And so exiting politics or exiting political engagement because it's a dirty business or because it has the potential to corrupt, I don't think that's the way that, or I don't think that's really the posture that Jesus offers to his disciples and followers in the New Testament. He says routinely, like, you're going to be out there. I'm going to send you out, right? I'm not going to build a holy huddle for everyone who thinks like me and wants to follow me, right? We're supposed to be in the world. And when we think about politics, not necessarily about being a way we can serve ourselves or our friends, but rather as a way to love our neighbors and communities, that can change the posture with which we approach politics. This doesn't, in my mind, and this is just one perspective, but it doesn't mean, we should forego partisan alliances. It doesn't mean we, shouldn't think one party is better suited to address certain issues than others, right? That we have to be above party politics in order to be a good Christian. I think good Christians can be involved in political parties across the American political spectrum, the major parties as well as minor parties in our system. But the thing that I'm convinced more and more of is the posture that we bring with us to the political table matters in many ways more than the outcomes that we're seeking, because that posture will influence why we're seeking the outcomes that we're seeking. And the values that we bring with us in terms of humility and confidence in our belief systems, but also the ability or the willingness to learn from one another. These are things that aren't necessarily prized in the political system today, and this is how Christians can be fundamentally different.
And just to piggyback up on that, I do like to also talk about government as sort of a form of love for neighbor. There are lots of ways that we can love our neighbor and lots of forums for that. But I think we also need to remember that government is one of those places. There are some issues, some problems, some services that it only really makes sense for government to provide that don't make sense for us to do privately. Sometimes it's the scale, and sometimes for example, I drove here on these really, actually, well, they're in the middle of construction, but pretty decently nice roads.
Right.
I've got a cup of water over here that's provided by my public utility. There's all these things that government is providing to all of us, services that we all need. And it really doesn't make sense for me to pave a little bit of road and Dan to pave another. And, so we take these things for granted now because we live in a very wealthy country that has lots of resources. So I think we need to start remembering government does a lot for everyone that makes our lives, the simplicity of our lives possible, and from which we all benefit. Lots of things that we disagree on, but just remembering government serves us all. And when we're talking scale, if I care about someone's health, I'm the kind of doctor who can't really help you. I have a PhD, not an MD. I want a system where we know we have medical doctors. So we're all pooling our resources to care for one another. So that's one point. There's sort of back to this dichotomy between should we take it all over or should we go away? Maybe I'll start with the should we go away. There is a stream of Christianity that does kind of take that posture, and I actually respect that very much. I'm not an Anabaptist, but Anabaptists would say out of love for neighbor, one should seek to not be a part of government, because government ultimately wields the sword. The power behind government is the power that can kill. And so Anabaptist pacifists are going to say we cannot support that. It doesn't mean they disobey laws. They just say we're not going to be active in government. We're going to pay our taxes. We're going to follow the laws as they are, but we're not going to actively participate. And I understand that, and I respect that theological position. It's not one I hold, but I think that's actually a fair position for Christians to hold. Those who say, you know what, I'm just done with this. I don't like it anymore. I'm out is a different answer. It's not a theologically grounded love for neighbor answer. It's I'm exasperated and I'm gone. So I don't want people to feel like they should not pay attention to politics or not be involved in politics because they're exasperated. I'm exasperated too. I'm right there with them in that sense. But I still think we should be involved if that is our Christian conviction that we should be a part of government. We should be a part of that. We should be following what's going on. We should be writing to our representatives. If we're concerned about something, maybe we attend a protest. We're actively engaged. Maybe, like you said, you run for office. I think all these things are great. What concerns me, though, is the opposite end of the spectrum of, okay, oh, we finally have power. Let's go for it. So love for neighbor is one key, easy, simple principle I think we need to always have first and foremost, and one that pastors can easily discuss in their congregations. And a second one is the golden rule, which we are to treat others as we would want to be treated. We're to love our neighbors as ourselves. So how would we feel if, so when people say, I want Christians in power doing Christian things, it's of course their version of Christian and their version of Christian things, but we'll just go with that broadly. Would you feel the same if it were a Muslim in power or a Hindu in power? And if so, great. I think we're in a good spot. But I think what happens is people get and says, oh, it's my opportunity. I can have power. I can do what I want. This isn't really about the greater good. This really isn't about loving our neighbor. It's about achieving power grasping power, taking hold of power, and not giving up to power. And I'm saying, if, let's say I'm a Democrat, if a Republican's in that position, would I be happy with it? I'm a Republican. If a Democrat were doing that, would I be happy with it? So I just think we need to be asking that simple question. So we have someone wanting to redistrict in the middle of a redistricting cycle. Do I like it? Would I like it if my party did it? Would I like it if the other party did it? These kinds of things. So if we're asking those questions, is this following the golden rule? I think that's a pretty easy check on, oh, wait a minute. I don't know, I would like it so much if that party were doing their things that way.
That's good.
I really like that distinction you made, Amy, about just being exasperated versus like the theological position. I wonder if I've been noticing this position more, and I wonder if it's just I'm noticing more or if it's becoming more common. But I keep hearing this from like pastors and theologians and podcasters, this idea that politics is evil. And they're not saying that evil things can happen in politics. They're saying politics itself, government itself is evil. So you're entering into like the devil's playground, if you enter into politics or government or anything like that. I don't know. Do y'all have the same visceral reaction that I do whenever I hear that?
Well, I mean, and this may not be the correct theological position here, but as a good Presbyterian, everything's evil.
Yeah.
So, why stop at politics? I think, a good definition of politics is, and Amy, I think you did a good job explaining, the role and purpose of government. One definition is what we do together, right? Politics is essentially a reality of living in community together. Politics is not necessarily and shouldn't be relegated to partisan politics or using the levers of government to institute one's agenda for power, right? That's an element of politics, and that maybe makes people uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable at times. That's just my personality type. But politics itself can be a lot more simple. It can be a lot more local. It can be a lot more neighborhood or community focused. And in those areas, I think that people ought to be a little bit more willing to get involved and not step away or opt out from those types of definitions.
Yeah, and Caitlin Chess talks about reframing how we think about politics, shifting it from federal focus only to a local focus first. That if I first imagine government and politics through the lens of, Amy, as you were talking about, how this street got me from A to B, how this water got here, how the dog catcher is picking up the dogs, and these are people I can meet. There's buildings I can walk into. These are places many times I can serve. And then imagining government, then at the county, state, federal level, as opposed to the inverse where we devote 98% of our imagination to the White House because it's retail and reality TV. And instead looking at the civil servants in our, who live down the street from me as how I imagine government to be. And then our engagement with it shifts to our actual neighbors. Like government, when I first think local, I'm actually thinking about my neighbors, my actual neighbors, and how we manage this common life together.
And also when you do that, and that's an idea and a concept that's long with us. The Catholic doctrine of subsidiarity is a good example. That sort of you start at the very smallest level that you can to care for people, and then you move up the levels as the need requires. But one of the things I think is also fun about local politics is that in many localities, local politics is nonpartisan. That doesn't mean that there are going to be people who kind of look like they might be more like a Democrat or more like a Republican, but ultimately many mayor races, city council races, this kind of things are going to be nonpartisan. And the idea is that you're going to get to know the people and you're going to understand their character and you're going to vote for who you think is best able to meet the needs of your local community. So it's just a good reminder. I think political parties are important. I think they, in many ways, help make voting choices easier. They help us understand our politics. But extreme partisanship is not helpful, and the angry partisanship is not helpful. So if we start at that local level, where the parties aren't even a part of the process, I think that's a good entry point into politics, too, because it reminds us, you know what? People around here can actually get things done. And I can actually have a voice. I can go to my city council meeting, and if I show up and sign in my name and address, I will get my 2 minutes to speak. So it doesn't mean it always goes swimmingly, but the idea that we can see it in action and that we're working, like you say, with our neighbors, with that person down the street, the person that you run into in the grocery store, it helps us see sort of the mechanics of politics and maybe takes away some of the demonization that's often coming in our national celebrity politics.
I love your I love your reference to Caitlin Chess and her work. Jeff Bilbrough at Grove City College has written a bit about where we put our attention these days, and I think there'd be a lot more. There's room for a lot less attention at the national level, a lot more attention at the local level. And, frankly, even someone like Rod Dreher in his book Benedict Option, there's been a lot of criticism of him and his book. But I think one of the arguments that I think holds up pretty well, especially in this kind of conversation, is how are we investing in our communities? What kind of churches are we attending? Is it in our neighborhood? Are we shoring up these specific community neighborhood institutions as Christians? And regardless of the why for that he's writing the book, I think I think the lesson is probably a good one, that we can be a lot more focused on investing locally rather than, tweeting into the void about what the president said today. I think that's right on the money.
And it's also a place, I think, where churches can really be a part. What is going on in your local community? And there's so many faith-based organizations doing such important work, and so highlighting the work of some of these different organizations, having like a little mission spotlight, that's what we call it at my church, but having people, so this is what this community organization is doing. You can volunteer, you can donate, all these ways that you can support, so that we're seeing the many different institutions that come alongside in this larger goal of trying to love our neighbors well.
So I'm going to offer a slight disagreement to this. So I think there are times when perhaps the national politics should deserve more of our attention than the local politics or state level, or in their times state level politics might deserve more of our attention. I think a lot of it is context specific. So like just during the last election last year, we had this local issue about that was related to taxes and emergency services. So it really affected a lot of people. And locally, I mean, my local community was very engaged, much more engaged on that local issue, I think, than national politics for most folks, because it affected them directly in a very personal way. So there are certainly, issues like that where that can come and go. But I mean, right now we talked about at the beginning of this podcast problems with habeas corpus and all these sorts of issues that are just extremely important right now and important for the future of our democracy. So I think sometimes there are, like I said, it becomes context specific. There are times when the national politics really does deserve a lot of our attention.
I think that's fair. I think my position on focusing more at the local, to some extent, might be aspirational. That I hope we can get to the point where the national government doesn't or shouldn't demand as much of our attention. That's probably not where we are now, although I think we can probably be more discerning about where we focus that attention at the national level, like this question of legal rights and constitutional protections, et cetera, should get a lot more of our attention than, say, the theatrical kabuki theater style of Washington, D.C. politics that doesn't really edify folks. I don't think that's not what you're saying, but so to some extent, maybe it's aspirational, but maybe we can just kind of hold these things in tension, right? Focus on what matters at the federal level, but be better about focusing what happens locally too.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, I hear your point and accept your point in many ways now, that obviously we need to care about what's going on in national politics. I'm not trying to say we shouldn't, but what I find is that most of us here exclusively or almost exclusively about national politics, very little about state politics, which is actually where so much of what's going on, and then almost nothing at all about local politics. So what I'd rather see is that if you start thinking of a food pyramid, I don't know what the right analogy here is, but that our diet is exclusively national politics, and it's also so full of vitriol and so full of disinformation maybe we could just, work a little bit of local politics into our diet so that we're not exclusively consuming national politics. Yeah, but I agree. We need to know what's going on. We need to be prepared if we don't understand what's going on. It's good to have conversations. Although, like qualifier here, I can't explain a lot of what's going on in contemporary American politics. As I tell people when they ask me what's going on, I'm like, I really can't help you too much because this is something I've never seen before. But we need to follow national, but also if we want to follow state and if we want to follow local, that takes an investment, a different kind of investment, because it is not going to be blared at you in every media form possible. You have to seek it out. But once you learn to seek it out, it's available.
I love this idea of a political attention pyramid. Got to eat your vegetables sometimes,
That's right.
Well,
and there's a lot of junk food in that pyramid.
Yeah. To add maybe a pastoral perspective, most of the folks that I care for are absolutely overwhelmed and asking questions like, there's so much going on that's important, but I can't carry it all.
Right.
And so one of the bits of recognizing that the body, the church, is a diverse and a diversely gifted organism, that there may be some who are going to keep the federal top of mind and are like educated on it and are like reading every day, and then others who are more local issue oriented, or maybe national and local issue oriented, immigration or something like that. And my encouragement for pastors listening is one of the ways we can encourage our congregations is to recognize we're not only individuals engaging in the body politic, we're the body of Christ engaging in the body of politic. Mm-hmm. And the Ephesians 3 and 4, one body, many members vision, I think, of the church can help us here too, that we can engage collectively with the diversification and delegation of responsibilities or attention spans. For instance, Dan, Amy, and Napp, you've all dedicated a ton of time to thinking about government and faith and religion and how that all and you're helping me. I've dedicated a ton of time to theological development and, the ecclesia of the church. And then within our congregations, similarly, there's different callings and giftings. And so that may be a space where pastorally we can invite people. What's your calling? What are you good at? What do other people see in you? You're really good at understanding what's going on federally? Great. In our little group of however many of us there are, that's your role. And then tell us when something important happens, as opposed to the death spiral of chaos that, I see when I get on Google News or whatever. And that may be a way for the church to engage in a healthy way, like maintaining emotional, spiritual health, maintaining our witness while we continue to engage in a bit of a messy situation right now.
Yeah. I think as people, I think it was Liz Brunig once observed, or maybe she was borrowing it from someone else, but this idea that, people were maybe not designed to have access to so much information about the world at any given moment. This doesn't mean that it's unbiblical or unchristian, but it can be very overwhelming just in terms of a cognitive load that we carry.
Yeah.
So having that permission structure to outsource some of that to find your niche, so to speak, and doesn't mean you disengage, but you do trust others to do more of the heavy lifting in some of these questions rather than feeling like you need to carry it all yourself. And for pastors, hopefully that's freeing, but also to encourage your congregants, again, not to go outside and touch grass and not, log off indefinitely, but to be comfortable not having an opinion on every little thing.
Yeah. I like how you framed it as sort of, this is part of the all-encompassing work of the church. At churches, most churches have like marital classes, parenting classes, financial advice classes, addiction services, all these things. So it seems to me like our citizenship, how to be good citizens, should be all part of that offering, right, of services that the church provides. And they do relate to each other. How we spend our time in political engagement, how we spend our time online. It, often, like you pointed out, often affects our emotions. It could affect our marriage, our parenting, and all these lots of other things. So our citizenship in the United States, how to be good citizens, all that should be part of what the church is offering.
Yeah. Well, Amy, Dan, Napp, thank you so much for investing your time in us today. I've been educated and blessed and encouraged, so thank you so much. We'll go around the loop real quick. Where can people find you and your work? We'll start with Amy.
Oh, I'm not really good at all that website stuff, so good news, if you just Google Amy Black Wheaton College, it'll come up and you can find me that way.
Perfect. Dan?
I occasionally share things on my Substack, Uneasy Citizenship. You can find what I'm interested in and writing about there.
Great. Napp?
AmericanValues.org is our website, and we have the YouTube, the Substack, the newsletter, social media, all the things you can find right there.
Cool. Well, thank you all so much for your ongoing ministry and for your ministry to us today. Appreciate you.